So I'm just checking that she actually got the invite, because I always panic at this point in the evening. But if necessary, we'll just do a chat about the possibilities until she joins anyway.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, is there anything you want to know in the 2 minutes before I hit the broadcast button and go live? Since you were rather dragged in at the last minute, or volunteered at the last minute.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I don't think we really have probably time to go through in 2 minutes. So yeah, no, we'll see how it goes.
Fair enough. Okay, so that's working.
But if she's not, in case she's not on, do you have enough? I'm sorry, I don't know your expertise. Are you also an expert on these rogue planets in order to kind of give background? Because I can't really talk about them at all, other than what I've read in the last hour or so.
Fortunately, last week I attended a Cafe Sci talk to find out about them, so I know enough to make a fair guess at what conditions are and go from there. So we've got enough to talk about, I think.
All right, good. And this is an hour, is it?
It's however long it is.
Okay.
We've had everything from 15 minutes. The record is about an hour and 41 minutes, I think.
Oh wow. Okay.
But there's no particular target. It's just open to, and I will start letting people in. It's just open to people who want to hear about science. So we get a handful of people who come into the actual Zoom call here, and we'll talk about it and ask questions. And everyone else will watch on live stream or watch after the fact.
Good.
So that's going live, nearly there. There we go, we've got a few people in the audience. Right, so good evening to everyone in the audience. Hopefully Jasmine will be able to join us soon. I'm just waiting for a response about whether she got the invite. But first I'll just introduce you to Jennifer Glass, talk a bit about Cafe Sci, because I always talk about Cafe Sci, and then we'll kick off. Jennifer Glass kindly volunteered at almost the last minute with no preparation whatsoever to come on and talk to us about, well, life on rogue planets. And so welcome on board.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here.
And have you done a Cafe Sci before?
No, never. My first one.
Brilliant. I highly recommend them in person, because the main drawback of this one is that the audience can't buy the speaker a drink. But they are an informal conversation about science. So the idea is it's a public conversation about a scientific topic. It can be a talk, it can be a panel, it can be a discussion. There's all sorts of things. And in this particular one, what happened was we got locked down for some reason, some months ago or years ago, can't remember which, and decided to take it online. So this came out of the Woking one, which was where the Martians landed, and it's run in a wine bar over there, and it's run in a art gallery there, and it was going to be moving to an Italian cafe there when everything shut down.
Okay.
So I decided I would take on the responsibility and take it online. And it's been great fun, a bit of work, but great fun. And people seem to find it rewarding. And this one came out of last week's discussion about rogue planets and whether you could get life on rogue planets. So Jasmine and I jumped on Twitter and said, hey, would anyone like to talk about this? And you volunteered. So welcome on. Let me just get the video sorted. There we go. So for all of the attendees, if you just want to, what's going on with that? There we go. So for everyone attending, as always, ask questions throughout. Do jump in, ask anything you want to. I'm here to rudely interrupt if someone's mid-flow and make sure the question is asked. For anyone watching at home, I know you're all watching at home, but saying watching on the live stream just comes across as a bit clunky. The same, I will try and keep an eye on the different live stream channels to see if you have any questions there. But first of all, right. Sorry, Jasmine did not get the invite. And just so you know, this is our proof that this is actually a live event. Things never go wrong when it's a pre-recorded event. It's always much smoother. So this is proof that we are human. It is live. This is genuinely going on right now. We have had that question come up on Twitch before. Right. Is that the right one? That is not the right one. Okay. So hopefully she'll be with us soon, and then I'll ask her to tell you about rogue planets. And then we can get on with working out who could live on them or what could live on them.
Excellent.
But actually, while we're waiting, do you want to give a quick introduction? Because I know you're Jennifer Glass. I know you're Mithano Jen on Twitter.
Yeah. So hi. Thanks for attending. And nice to meet all of you virtually. And I am an associate professor at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, here in the US, where we are having all kinds of problems, as you know. Well, we usually have a lot of problems. We have more than we usually do. And so we're very much inside right now, not going out for a long time. And I run a lab at Georgia Tech, and we study greenhouse gases. We study interactions. Hi, Jasmine. And we study interactions between greenhouse gases and microbes. I'm very interested in astrobiology. I guess that's why I'm here today. Although I've never given this, amazingly, this question is so cool, and I've never been asked it, nor have I heard much conversation about this. So I'm really excited to learn more from Jasmine about this exciting topic. And then I will do my best to try to speculate on what life could possibly be there. It's a huge question. It's a really cool question. And yeah, looking forward to talking to you.
And for Jasmine, obviously, some of the attendees know who you are. Jennifer doesn't. You were here last week or there last week, or we need better terminology for this stuff. But you were on last week on rogue planets, and obviously we got to the question of life on rogue planets. Do you want to just do a quick introduction for Jennifer?
Yeah, so I am going to be a third-year student undergrad at Purdue University, and I study planetary science with a double major in atmospheric science. So I'm particularly interested in the atmospheres of other planets and like what we can learn from them. I really find weather on other planets interesting. And so I'm kind of going down the route of astrobiology as well, just because we can use the atmospheres of other planets to kind of figure out, okay, is it suitable for life to exist on these planets? And so I've always found the question of extraterrestrial life really interesting, like for as long as I can remember. So that's definitely the path I want to go down. So this is the topic, for me. So yeah, that's basically it. I also do undergrad research in planetary atmospheres. So right down my alley.
So in other words, you're both coming at the same question from opposite sides, which is
Yeah.
pretty much perfect. So just to get started, do you want to do a quick recap on what rogue planets are?
Yeah, so rogue planets are essentially just planets that don't orbit a star. Basically, how they became rogue planets is early on in the formation of their stellar system, they were, there was something that knocked them out. And the most common thing would be a gravitational interaction with a gas giant, because rogue planets tend to be fairly small. I mean, there are instances where there are Jupiter-sized, even bigger rogue planets, but most of them are fairly small because they have to be able to interact with the gravitational forces of a bigger planet to kind of be slingshot out of their solar system. It's kind of like the method that we use to send probes to our solar system. We kind of take advantage of the gravitational fields of these bigger planets to send our probes further out. And so it's kind of the same thing, except these rogue planets don't do it intentionally. It just kind of happens. And so they're kind of stuck floating in interstellar space without a star.
So given that, and they've not got the input of energy from a star, and this was where the questions around life started last time.
Mhm.
Obviously, in planetary formation, there is quite a lot of energy involved, so there might be stored energy. So what type of atmosphere might they have, to you, Jasmine? And then once you know a bit about that atmosphere, Jennifer, could something live there?
Yeah, so this would be more of like a hypothetical because we can't really figure this out, at least yet. But it is, it's a question to ask. Could a rogue planet hold on to its atmosphere after being slung out of its planetary system, which is interesting to note. Because, we have our star, and stars are known, like depending on the planet's distance from the star, it could keep an atmosphere or cannot keep an atmosphere. If we're too close to our star, then our atmosphere could be blown away. But thanks to our magnetosphere, we kind of have something to protect us from that. We retained our atmosphere. But interestingly, studies have been done saying that rogue planets could be able to hold on to their atmosphere. But I think it's just something to, study further on in the future, because these planets, they're going to be cold, because they don't have the heat from that star, but they might be able to have some heat in their cores left over from their formation. Which would be able to, like we talked about last week, they might be able to have a liquid ocean beneath that layer of ice, because a layer of ice is going to form when they're, away from a star. There's going to be no heat coming in. So if there was a liquid ocean on the surface, it would just be frozen over, but it could still be liquid underneath the surface. Like we see in our moons, in some of our moons in our solar system, it could still be liquid under the surface if there is enough heat generating from the core. As for the atmospheres, I can't really, we're still working on studying exoplanet atmospheres, and that field is still really growing, and we need better technology like the James Webb Space Telescope, to kind of help us out, because we're still uncertain about exoplanet atmospheres, and those are planets where, we can readily observe them and their stars. And then, rogue planets, that's another question. So I'm not sure what their atmospheres could be like.
But there could be liquid water, I won't say warm, but some sort of liquid water because of that residual heat for at least a while.
Yes.
Okay, so Jennifer then, no light, no atmosphere, solid ice above, liquid water, possibly some volcanic activity to keep it liquid. So somewhat like Europa, I guess. Life, yes, no, possible, maybe.
This is such a fascinating question, and Jasmine did such a beautiful job explaining it. Thank you. that was wonderful. I learned a lot. So, I think it's kind of I think that if life could start under such conditions, and that's where I'll come back to that I'm not so sure about that. I think if life could start somehow, that if, or in other words, that it could live under those conditions, basically. I think that what we know about, obviously we just have an N of 1 of our planet, but those conditions that you described don't sound, they're extreme to us, but potentially they're not so extreme. It depends on kind of, what temperatures. But if you have liquid water, if you have volcanism, kind of like what we imagine for Europa conditions, we think that could be habitable. It's so I think absolutely if you could start life. The question is, but getting life started is kind of quite a different matter than continuing it over billions of years, right? And so how do you start with that spark kind of that starts it? And there's a lot of, we can talk more about that, but whether UV was required to start life is something else. But I think you're talking about, hydrothermal vent kind of seafloor conditions or living in a ocean water column. Hey, that's totally fine for life. We see life all over there. So, and so I can talk more about the atmosphere too and metabolism, but I don't know if you want to, I guess I could ask, jump in, James, if that's okay. I read somewhere it was thought to be hydrogen. Is that true as the main component of the atmosphere, or is there a debate on
that? Jasmine?
Yeah. Most, hydrogen is fairly common. We have the sun converting hydrogen to helium and so forth. And we have, gas giants like Jupiter and Saturn, which hydrogen and helium are the main components of their atmospheres. So yeah, hydrogen is a main component of many atmospheres. So we could assume, but then again, we haven't found any I'm fairly certain we haven't found any exoplanets with hydrogen. I could be wrong, but I'm from what I've seen, I haven't seen anything about that.
I was reading somewhere that maybe these rogue planets could actually have a better chance of keeping their hydrogen atmospheres because they don't have. Is that something? Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, because they don't have. I could totally see that because they don't have that. Like I said, they don't have that influx from the star coming in to kind of, as we've heard about many other planets, they blow the atmospheres away because of the constant particles from their star. So yeah, I could totally see that happening.
So I was going to say about hydrogen. Hydrogen is really good for life. Life just loves hydrogen. And it can, use it as a source of electrons. Obviously it's H2, it doesn't have carbon in it. It has to get its carbon elsewhere. But hydrogen is a great source of electrons for life and kind of fueling life. And it's one we often don't really think about, but our microbes in our gut are working on hydrogen, making it and breaking it down. And so microbes love hydrogen, and hydrogen is just a great fuel. And so that would totally be fine for, without any oxygen. It's fine if there's no oxygen. There was no oxygen on Earth for the first half of Earth history, and obviously life flourished, well, maybe not large eukaryotes, but everything else flourished under those conditions. And so lots of life is fine without oxygen and with tons of hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
You said something earlier about UV and and whether it was, or whether it might be essential to starting life. And I'm assuming it's we don't know, but maybe.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I can just say that there are some studies that suggest that in order for organic building blocks of life, the building blocks of DNA and RNA, actually synthesizing those is actually quite complicated, quite difficult. And some people think that it's essential to have UV, and that it was important actually to be near the surface of the Earth with the source of UV, and other things too. A lot of people think about wet dry cycles and how much water there was around. You have to have some water, but not too much. So, maybe that's a very Earth-centric view, because we know we only have this N of 1. Life started, we know we have life on Earth, and we presume that it started here. There's some people that debate that, but most people think that it started on Earth and didn't come from somewhere else. And so we know those early Earth conditions must have been possible, so we can kind of extrapolate back from that. What was the early Earth like? Okay, what chemical reactions could have started it? And a lot of people think UV was really important. So if there's really, very, very little UV out there on a rogue planet, could you have reactions occurring in this ice with no UV, or, ice water interface with no UV? And I think that's actually a hypothesis that is testable. And I think there's people starting to work on this, and there's some papers out there, but it's those kind of conditions we might be able to mimic in the lab and see what kind of, chemistry we can create. We're not going to probably create life, but we can see in our timescales, human timescales, but we can see how complex organics can we get.
Okay, so let's say it is, or some sort of energy which requires boundary conditions such as water is. Jasmine, if life had formed on a planet, very simple life, let's assume, and migrated back into the sea, at the point where it was being flung out to become a rogue planet, what would conditions be like? Is there any chance of something like that surviving?
Yeah, that was also part of the study that I was reading, where they were saying that, if there was life on the planet before the planet became a rogue planet, how would it, would it be able to survive? And I think the study came to the conclusion that it actually would have a chance of survival. But, it depends on, would it be able to adapt? Because conditions would be very different than if there's a star. It'd be the same thing for us. Like, imagine, we all know how important the sun is to us. If we use the sun for, plants use it for photosynthesis, we get vitamin D from it. We use it for climate regulation, it's used for food, growing food. Like, how would we be able to survive without it? So I think it would depend on the species' ability to adapt. They would probably have to, like Jen said, they probably have to live underwater, some situation like that. And I don't know if, it all depends. If they were living above ground, if there is a solid surface and the life was living above the ocean to begin with, then what can you do? So it would be like us, like we wouldn't be able to survive underwater. So, maybe there'd have to be some sort of evolutionary process over time, if that was possible, some evolutionary process to kind of get the life to the point where it could survive without a star.
And another question we had come in a little while ago, just what is Europa?
Just what is Europa?
The moon, not the goddess or one of the others, the moon specifically.
Okay, so Europa is one of Jupiter's 4 Galilean moons. So we regularly talk about it. And it's believed that Europa has an underwater ocean, a subsurface ocean, if I'm correct. And, we want to explore that and kind of see if that's possible, because we always talk about life being possible on moons rather than the planets themselves. And we've seen with some of the Jupiter moons and, Saturn's moon, Titan, like what's going on, with those moons. And if there is life on there, how did that happen? And is it possible for life to sort of evolve on a moon rather than a planet?
Okay. And there's another question, which is going back to UV, sunlight can kill things. Are
Yes.
there forms of life that might actually prefer living on rogue planets? At this point, we're getting very hypothetical, but that's fine.
Yeah.
We're allowed.
Yeah.
No one's allowed to shout us down. We can say whatever we want. But
Sure.
yeah, are there things that might prefer those very low energy conditions? Jennifer?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. I think I think that if you can get life started, that's the if, right? I don't know about lack of UV for starting it, but if you can get it started, once you have a cell and you have evolution, you have Darwinian evolution happening, you have, well, it could be an alternative life form, but we know all life on Earth is using ribosomes, is making proteins, and it's using the same 20 amino acids. That's our current understanding of life. If you could get that started, we know that form of life, the only form we know of so far, does just fine under the conditions you described. I mean, could survive under the conditions you survive. It's very, the whole extremophile thing, it's all very human, anthropocentric, right? Yes, centered on humans. It's it would be different. It would be very probably slow growing, right? But we have that life form right out, even if you go down in the soil here, there's bugs like that. We call them bugs, but bacterial and archaeal cells like that right under our feet here. So we have examples of it happening, like, here on Earth. So why not? Why couldn't it be out there, if it could get started is the question.
There was one question which came up last time, which was an interesting one, and you might be able to shed some light on it. There is a theory, apparently, that you could get silicon-based life. The problem is that silicon chemical bonds are extremely fragile and break in higher energy conditions if they're that sort of complex bond. But if you're in a very low energy environment, theoretically, is there any reason we know of that you couldn't have an entirely different basis for life on one of these?
I'm not an expert at all on silicon life, I'll say that. But I don't think there's any reason particularly that I know of that you couldn't, but I'd say it's almost, but there are carbon based life forms that we know of, right? Mile beneath our feet, that are surviving under not so different conditions than what you're describing. And carbon is way more common, than we think throughout the universe. Then, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. Then I'm not an astronomer. Then
that's a very carbonocentric viewpoint.
Yeah, I don't know if we need. Yeah, I think we think about silicon because we have tons of it in our rocks, and it would probably be abundant also in this rogue planet with its volcanism. But I don't know if you necessarily need the silicon life on these rogue planets. Maybe there's other situations, that are even harsher. But from what I've been hearing, if we have volcanism going on, if we have a bar of pressure of hydrogen in the atmosphere, that sounds like a great, not so great. It's very dark, it's very cold, but it's not so bad for life under those. And you have liquid water, not so bad. Maybe you don't need silicon life.
Okay, and back onto having planets thrown out of their solar system. If you were living on one of those planets, if we were specifically, so limits of the senses we've got, would the catapulting of the planet out be physically detectable? Would you notice it in a human lifespan, and would you actually feel it happen, assuming you happen to be on the side of the planet that was, for want of a better word, safe?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I feel like in some sense, you probably would, just because of how strong, we tend to think of how strong the other planets' gravitational pulls are. And think of a Jupiter-sized planet. Like, Jupiter is massive. Like, we can't even fathom, how massive this planet is. I mean, for one thing, the Great Red Spot is like double the size of Earth, right? Like, that's insane. Just one tiny storm on this planet is double the size of our planet. So imagine a planet that size pulling on us. Like, there's no way we wouldn't feel that. Like, that's massive, right? Like, obviously we can't feel our planet rotating, but that makes sense because we're on it, so we're kind of, like, that makes sense to me why we don't feel its rotation. I mean, that would be awful if we did. Like, that would suck. But if a giant planet was pulling on us, and physically moving our planet, like, there's no way we wouldn't feel a little bit, at least. Like, I don't know, maybe we wouldn't.
Can I ask a follow-up? Sorry to steal.
Yeah, that's fine.
How long does it take? So you mentioned at the beginning that maybe it could have evolved life when it was back in the solar system and then been flowing out and then have kept that life. What kind of timescales are we talking about for being the flinging out part of it? How long does that take, and when kind of in the evolution of a solar system does that happen?
Interesting. That's an interesting question. I would think it would be early on in the solar system, because I'm not sure if you've heard, like, planets tend to migrate during the formation of the solar system. Like, the gas giants, it's believed that they didn't form where they are today. They formed closer and they migrated out. So what I would believe is that it would be early on in the solar system's formation, because if the planet was, if a Jupiter-sized planet is closer to the star, then, it'd be closer to our rogue planet, our future rogue planet. So then they could interact, because Jupiter is so far away from us, we wouldn't be able to interact with it now. And so on that time scale, I would say it would be in the early formation. I don't know exactly how long it would be, but however long our solar system took to form. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I
think it was pretty fast, right?
It was pretty fast, yeah. I just don't remember exactly
how years range.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Like, or maybe even faster. I don't know if
yeah.
So all that was pretty fast. So I mean, the question I have is, like, whether life could actually, I mean, we think life is pretty old, but life have started, who knows, but maybe under different, who knows, in another solar system. I wouldn't put it past that, I mean,
and
couldn't evolve that quickly.
Yeah, and I do know that, for instance, if it happened to Earth, like if we became a rogue planet, say, I do know it would only take a couple of months for our climate to drastically change. So we would be able to hold on to whatever we are experiencing now for, a little bit of time. But after that, couple of months pass, everything's gonna be, way colder than it is now. And, fast forward, oceans start freezing, all that stuff. But yeah, I know it would take only a couple of months for us to experience those changes.
Okay. I've got a question here from Jordan Barbara, which is for both of you. So the lifetime of a star is typically quite limited. So G-type stars last for about 10 billion years, not very long at all. Are there any theoretical limits to the lifespan of a rogue planet? And if a planet is around for long enough, what would that mean for the probability of life emerging? So first part of that for you, Jasmine, and second part, Jennifer, or both of you.
Yeah. This kind of goes back to what I mentioned briefly last week. So the study that I read, I'm going to keep mentioning it because it's very important to this. It did say that a certain size, it would have to be a fairly small rogue planet. It would be able to hold on to if it's warm enough in the core, right? Because if the core freezes, it's done. It's a dead planet, right? So if the core is not frozen, if there's still some residual heat left over from its formation, I did read that the planet would be able to hold on to that liquid ocean, if it's, beneath the surface of ice, it would be able to hold on to that liquid ocean for like 5 billion years. And that's insane. That's, half the lifetime of our sun, right? So I would assume a fairly long time, a planet would be able to hold on to whatever and kind of last. Planets do last a while, but it's, as far as its climate changing, like I mentioned earlier, its climate would take, a blink of an eye, the climate would change, but the time scale of the, planet actually lasting and, life being able to adapt, that would be much longer. The star would still be alive from what I know. The star would still be going, generating energy, even though it doesn't matter for the rogue planet, but on a star's lifetime, it would still be alive from what I know.
This is such a fascinating question because I've never thought about it before. I always usually I think about suns running out of energy, before I think of a planet running out of its, well, Mars is kind of an example where, I guess you could say, but we are so Earth-centric, right? That I think we have another 5 billion years or so till the sun, is that right? I think until, our star explodes. So we're fine. We're only halfway through. We've got another 5 billion to go. And I'm pretty sure we'd still have our tectonics would have slowed down, but I think it would still be going. I think that far in the future. I think it would. So I'm so star Earth centric that I've never even thought about how long it would take for a planet to just, like Earth, to actually slow down to the point where the volcanism would stop, the magnetosphere would stop, and then ultimately you stop the recycling of nutrients because you stop kind of the volcanism, and presumably you run out of energy, fuel for life, presumably. But that's a fascinating question. It would really, we just have to do the calculation, and I guess it would be longer, I think, though, than, so I think it will last longer than the Earth will, with this, given that we'll be obliterated by the sun eventually. So maybe they could have more, assuming we head in the direction of more and more advanced life forms, maybe these rogue planets could even have, of course, they don't probably have oxygen. Yeah, I would say it's going to be hard to get oxygen, which we think there's this connection between higher life, bigger cells, and oxygen. And there, without a star, that's where our energy, right, to get oxygen comes from. Green plants and originally cyanobacteria made all the oxygen, right? They are totally dependent on our sun. So how do you get a lot of oxygen without a sun around? I don't know. That's going to take some very specific chemical conditions that might be pretty hard to come up with. So I don't know, for advanced life might be hard, assuming advanced life needs oxygen. Maybe there's advanced life that doesn't need oxygen that I haven't imagined yet. So that's my.
Okay, so there's a few other, there's loads of questions. Right, so this one's about that sort of 5 billion years, but the other part is from watching stuff grow in my garden, not my own garden. I'm not good at gardening, nothing grows near me, but George and Barbara have mentioned that advanced life would probably require a lot of energy, and a rogue planet will have orders of magnitude less than one orbiting a star, even if you're accessing the energy in the core. Has anyone done the calculations, or are there any quantitative measures of the amount of energy that might actually be available on a rogue planet for life?
I haven't looked into it, but I'm sure it's going to be very little. I think it depends on when the planet actually becomes a rogue planet, and since it is fairly early on in the planetary system's formation, I do think there would be a high amount of energy to access. Think about how think about how hot our own planet was when it formed. I mean, we do have like scenario, Earth essentially was like a lava planet. There was molten lava like everywhere. Everything was so hot, basically. So I would assume that if these planets are becoming rogue planets fairly early on in their formation, then I would assume there's a good amount of energy, because I mean, think about the early Earth. If that happened to us, and we were a lava world and we cooled, I mean, there'd be a good amount of energy in the core still that we could use, that would be keeping us warm. So I think it could go either way depending on when it happened.
And there's another mention on that around Jupiter, and the question of, isn't it sort of a protostar or failed star fueled by its own internal nuclear fusion? So could that go on for longer? Because you mentioned about smaller rogue planets being the ones that could hold on to their energy. So what would happen with a much larger one like that?
Yeah, Jupiter-sized ones, like I do know about the thing with Jupiter. So I did know about that, and it's something I don't think about very often, because it's just it's like, wow, that's crazy. But I don't even know I'm not even sure how common Jupiter-sized rogue planets are, just because, what imagine the size of something that would have to fling such a large planet like out of its planetary system. Like, that's mind-boggling to me. So I don't even know how common they actually are. But I'm not sure if a Jupiter-sized planet would be able to hold on to it. Probably would, like, just because of its mass. But I'm not sure like how fast it would use up its energy, just because a bigger planet's going to need more energy. So I'm not sure how fast its energy would actually be used up, from its formation compared to a smaller sized planet. So that would be my take on that.
And we've got a few more questions, and I want to do a sort of lead into those. So
Yeah.
related to the life having formed, let's talk about hibernation.
Okay.
So let's
Sure,
say
Jen could talk about that.
that's the hope. Life's formed, planet's been thrown out of the solar system, things have got cold. How long could some form of life survive, not thrive, not grow, not adapt, not evolve, not change in any way, but survive in stasis in that sort of extremely low energy conditions?
So I think at least millions of years, if not even tens of millions, might be starting to push it. But these spores and things can last a very, very long time. And we think about this in terms of planetary protection too, about, are we going, when we land on Europa, how do we prevent potentially life that was on the spacecraft contaminating Europa potentially, because we know there are, places on Europa that are habitable. If it could get down into the ocean, we don't want to contaminate. So we think about that, and obviously that won't take millions of years, luckily, or we would never get to see the outcome. But thousands to millions of years seems reasonable. So it sounds like these rogue planets are migrating in those kind of timescales, if I understand right. And so if life could get started, but it might be tricky to start life, even, especially if it is, I guess, depending on where it came from in the solar system, what were the conditions, how long did it have to be in the solar system before it was flung out? Could life have started and been carried out? But in terms of there was part of the question about hibernation too, right? We study systems deep underground, actually under the ocean, that have where you can form these hydrate structures, where you can have a gas molecule stabilizing water. And so they're right on the edge of liquid water. Basically, if you can move them a little on the stability zone, you get liquid water again. And we're interested in microbes that could basically modulate how these things grow. And that's what we do in the lab with experiments, is we make synthetic analogs of these hydrates, and then we take gene sequences from these deep underground organisms, and we expose them and we do experiments to see, and they change. We're observing that definitely life can change the conditions. It can, it can regulate how much water is around. It's amazing what life can do. That's another question about what is advanced life, right? Because is advanced life just having a brain and having a consciousness? Or do we consider advanced life in terms of what chemistry it can do, how advanced its chemistry is? Because arguably the microbes deep underground are more advanced than we are, because they can breathe more kind of things, right? So it's kind of a question of, what is advanced? But in terms of what we consider advanced is having a big brain, having consciousness, being able to make things. That so far we think requires oxygen, But
so I'm going on a sort of story with these questions. So the next one that came up, do rogue planets ever join other solar systems and become non-rogue planets again?
That's actually something that I've thought about, because my sister, obviously she's not into what I do. She's more on the artsy side, but she did ask me one time when I told her about rogue planets, she was like, what if a rogue planet just joined our solar system? And I was like, I've never thought about this before. I don't know. I think it depends on like how far away it is from, Yeah,
So-
I think it depends. Like this is something I really need to think about. I think it depends on how far away it is from like another planetary system, and like how common. We have to think about like how common planetary systems are in the universe. And since there are so many stars, okay, what's the fraction of stars that actually has a planetary system, and all that, do the math there. But I think, yeah, if it gets close enough to another planetary system, the gravitational pull could just pull it back in. I mean, it doesn't seem that far-fetched if you think about it.
So also related to where I'm going, from
Mhm.
Nikki, could life survive on an exoplanet or a rogue planet? Can life survive with extremes of temperature? And by that, really extremes. So volcanic all the way to near absolute zero extremes.
So I saw that question and I was trying to get ready for it. I was trying to think ahead of time about this, because it's a great, what's the most extreme temperature range? I don't know of any that can go all the way. I think the record now is like 120 degrees C, like over boiling at a hydrothermal vent, that all the way down to like far, tens of negative, Celsius, deep in the ice. I don't know anything though that can be both. And I bet I say this, and now I bet I'm going to Google it and I'm going to find something, but that could be, you go all the way from plus 100, Celsius all the way to -5 or something. I can't currently think of that. When there are, they call them poly extremophiles, that are more than one extremophile. If you're temperature loving and maybe you're acid loving, or you can. But I can't think of one that's high temperature and low temperature. But there are, some that can survive quite a big range in between, all the way from just a few Celsius all the way up to like 50 or so. So I'd say that there's, tens of Celsius of, obviously we can also, we can probably do that too. So yeah, we can survive pretty big, but what's the biggest range? I can't think of a microbe that can go that far different. But I'm probably will right after this.
Okay, and still related, sort of. How would we know if our solar system had captured a rogue planet?
I think detection. Like, isn't there a whole thing going on about like what's it called, Planet X or something, where people are just, there's something else out there. So maybe like, our technology is pretty advanced, at least for our solar system, and when it comes to observations, like we have pictures, we have pretty high quality pictures of every planet in our solar system, right? So I'm pretty sure, scientists would be able to figure out, hey, this object wasn't here before. And I also think like the chemical properties of such, they would be able to see, okay, these, this is something that wouldn't, maybe would not have formed like early on because of its chemical properties, because they would be so, I could imagine their chemical properties would be so different compared to what we have in our solar system based on, where they were originally and such. Yeah.
I wonder if also it could be, I don't know if the question is also wondering if it happened before we evolved. So how do we know if one of our planets was rogue and had come in?
Oh, yeah.
But I bet it would have a different, if we had like a meteorite come from it, I bet it would have a very anomalous, if it formed in a different solar system, I'm assuming it would have a very different elemental composition, and it would have maybe a different, I don't know, would it have a different orbit or something
different spin, maybe? Different direction of spin?
It would be different. I definitely think it would be easy to figure it out. Now, would we be able to know if it was here before us? Probably not, obviously, but there would be properties to figure out, hey, this is pretty odd compared to, what's going on in our solar system.
Okay. So I think we're coming up to the hour now, and I kind of want to tie a whole group of these questions together. So I'm just going to ask them and then let you two chat and speculate and see where it goes. Right. So give me a moment to just start throwing them in. One of the problems with spaceships is the difficulty of getting rid of excess heat. How much energy would be lost from rogue planets due to radiated heat, and would an atmosphere act as an insulator or conductor? Do you think that in 5 billion years, as our sun dies, we could have the technology, or the technology is possible to deliberately go rogue and find a new star? On the energy from a core, Earth's core energy powers tectonic plates and volcanoes. Isn't that actually much more than the solar flux that powers life? So there's a huge pool of energy, and it's delivered in greater quantities, even if it's not exploited in greater quantities. And then last two, I promise. So some complex chemistry doesn't stop but is slowed by cold. So could rogue planet life be slow but having lots of time in stable conditions eventually evolve? And finally, solar systems are risky. They're full of junk, comets, asteroids, radiation, change. Might rogue planets offer a more stable, much longer evolutionary timescale? So I'm just going to shut up now and let you two speculate, bounce off each other, and see where it goes.
These are very, these are questions I would be thinking about very late at night. I'm going through them too. Catapult Earth into space. That's an interesting one. I don't know if we could do that. I think it all depends on how advanced our technology gets. It's something to think about. We landed on the moon 51 years ago, right? And now we plan on sending humans to Mars. And that was in, such a small time scale that we got to that point. Our technology when it comes to space travel is pretty advanced. We're sending, if you think about James Webb and what James Webb is actually going to do, that's insane. That's very advanced technology. And we've come in such a short time span. So, think about 50 more years from now, what our technology could be like, assuming we're advancing at the same rate that we are now. And that's insane. So I don't know what technology could actually do that, move an entire planet. I don't know how we could do that. So for now, I'm going to say no, because I don't even know if that's actually possible. Physics wise, I'm not, an astrophysicist. So maybe you could ask a physicist about this, but physics wise, I'm not sure if that's even possible.
I can answer a bit about the
Yeah,
one
you can. Yeah,
as
you
a
can.
as a kind of a geologist turned
Yeah.
microbiologist. So actually the Earth's kind of geothermal heat left over from its, cooling from its original heat from formation and radiogenic heat from nuclear, decay actually is very minor compared to the sun, believe it or not. I think, again, being Earth centric, we feel like there's this huge core and there's so much heat, and that's true. But compared to the sun, actually, we still get like most of our energy from the sun. And that's what's really doing most of the, affecting our atmospheric turnover and our ocean turnover. Of course, plate tectonics wise, you're right that that's driven by this internal heat source. That's totally true. And for life that on these rogue planets, it would have to obviously be, we don't have a star, and so it would all have to be coming from that geothermal. And so that's why I think it would be slower growth rates, especially the longer in time, because you don't have that sun. So I think it's totally, that life would be totally dependent on those volcanoes. And as those slow down, as that geothermal flux slow down, they would eventually run out of energy. Yeah, so that's, I hope that kind of helps with the budget question.
Yeah.
Let's see, trying to remember the other questions. I think a lot of them were very astronomical.
Oh yeah.
There was the one on complex chemistry not stopping but being slowed
Yeah.
by cold.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah. Again, I think it could, so it says complex chemistry doesn't stop but is slowed by cold, right? Yeah, maybe I'm almost thinking like these conditions that we'll know more about when we get this lander, is it Dragonfly on Titan?
Yep.
Titan has amazing complex chemistry and hydrocarbon chemistry. So we're going to learn a lot more about hydrocarbon chemistry at extreme cold and really cool chemistry when we get, so to speak, when we get to Titan. So when is that happening? In hopefully within all of our lifetimes.
Oh, it is. Yes.
It's in a few years, right? I mean, it's in the next.
I think it'll be in the 2030s.
2030s, decades.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
And check out the Dragonfly mission.
Oh yeah.
Website. Really cool.
Let's see. One of the problems is, well, you answered that one about the excess heat, I think. Difficulty getting rid of excess heat. Yeah. Oh. Solar system diversity, comets, asteroid radiation. Might rogue planets offer more stable, much longer evolutionary timescale? Okay, so I think they're saying there's like, we have a lot of things in our solar system that can kind of bombard Earth. Because, we have our sun, we have radiation from our sun, we have interstellar objects that are coming from, outside. And then, we have change that even humans are producing. So that's also interesting to talk about. Okay, so they're saying like there's nothing to kind of affect. If there is evolution taking place on a rogue planet, there's nothing to kind of affect it, right? Like there's nothing outside to kind of affect it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if, well, okay, I think it depends, because if something outside, like if life didn't actually originate on Earth, like if something outside actually brought the chemicals necessary for life to actually start here, then it's like, if this rogue planet didn't have life on it before, then how could it, evolve life if nothing could bring life to it? If that goes, if life didn't actually start on Earth, if actually something brought it over, then we'd have to rethink everything then if that was the case. And I think that would be the same case with this rogue planet. If there's nothing to bring that life to it, like if there isn't an asteroid that passes by or whatever, you know, how would life be able to start on it? But if there's already life on it, then, you know, in terms of evolution, you know, that's something beyond me to think about, because I'm still baffled by our own evolution, right? Like how we just had these tiny microbes in water, right, in the ocean, and then all, you know, over time they, you know, they started getting bigger, they started getting more complex, you know, started eating, photosynthesizing, doing all this, and then eventually they just, you know, they grew limbs at some point and they started venturing out of the ocean, and that's how we got land-based life. So that's our own evolution baffles me. So how can I really think about evolution taking place on another planet, right? So
I
I don't
think,
know, Jennifer.
yeah, this question is so interesting.
It's so interesting. I can't even.
You're right, like Chris, that, you know, it is so dangerous. Like, look, would we be here if the dinosaurs hadn't been, if that asteroid hadn't hit and exterminated the dinosaurs, right? Like, you know, there's been so many freak events. We've had, you know, how many big, 5 or so big, huge mass extinctions that have basically wiped out a lot of the surface of our planet and then reestablished it with something usually kind of different, all dating back to the same original, you know, last universal common ancestor with the same, you know, DNA code and protein code and all that, but a very different looking morphology, etc. So you're right that if we had this rogue planet, it probably would have had a much kind of more stable, boring kind of history. It wouldn't have probably had these asteroid impacts, and it would probably have just kind of continued on, I would assume, with single-celled, very interesting chemically, but not maybe so interesting to look at. Very slow growing life forms that are hard to detect, because you have to, you know, if there's not so many of them and they're living way down in the ocean or at the bottom of the ocean, how do you see those if you're looking at them from, you know, far away? Like, how would you ever see that? Maybe there's life out there, but it's, you know, it's in the dark, it's way down at the bottom of another ocean, and yet it's there, but it's very hard to detect. So I think it's very interesting, and it might, what happens with evolution with a much more stable planetary system that just kind of goes at this stable thing until just the geothermal energy gradually fades away. So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, because it is now 8 o'clock, that's probably a good question to stop on, because I'm not sure there's going to be, we've got some other great questions, but it feels like that one had a lot of passion and interest behind it. So if you two can stick around for a minute, I'm just going to say goodbye to everyone watching on the various live feeds. For the people in the room here, we'll be going for a bit longer, but everyone on Facebook,